Hey guys, I'm Charles Neal. What I'm going to attempt to do here is try to give you a basis of understanding a pre-stain conditioner, aka a blotch control. Basically what we have is, commercially we have an oil base and we have a water base. Now many people also, and for years I did it, we would use a diluted shellac. But no matter what you choose, there's some basics you need to understand. The first is, what a pre-stain has to do is that within the confines of the wood, we have soft grain and hard grain. The problem is, and what causes blotching, is that the soft grain absorbs more of your colorant, whether it be a stain or a dye, than the hardwood, and blotching occurs. Now, with that said, there's another thing that happens with an oil-based stain or an oil-based preconditioner. The problem is that, and most of them are simply a diluted boiled linseed oil, diluted with some mineral spirits. But having experimented and worked with this particular subject for many, many, many years, what we found was that any solvent base, doesn't matter, it will react with the tannins in the wood. Now, what am I talking about? What happens is, like this piece of maple, when you put an oil-based pre-stain on it, what it's going to do is, the soft grain in here is going to absorb more of the oil, and it itself is going to react, and thus it can cause blotching on its own. A water base will not. Okay, now, but what I really want to address here is that the big deal is that getting your dilution and the solution correct is imperative. Any pre-stain, doesn't matter, is going to seal your wood to some degree. When it does that, then it's going to affect color retention. Meaning, if you get too much pre-stain, it's not going to take a color. Now, oil-based products, in my experience, are the worst. Here's why. The oil itself is sealing the wood, creating the pre-stain, creating the blotch control. But then the oil that's in the stain itself is sealing it even more. If you've ever used an oil-based stain and you put it on a piece of wood, no blotch control at all, but then you decide you want it a little darker or something, and you come back and put a second coat on, does pretty much nothing. And that's because the oil has sealed the wood. Thus, you're going to get a very, very, very light color. As compared to with no pre-stain. But we still got the blotching. A water base, on the other hand, isn't as prone to do that. And a water base does work under an oil-based stain. But again, you've got to experiment in anything you do. You've got to experiment a little bit. Meaning, if you get too much of a water base, you're going to get the same result. You're going to get an extremely light color. As a matter of fact, anytime you use a preconditioner, no matter what it is, you're going to get a lighter color. Just the way it works. Now, oftentimes for the water base, now you can see here, I'm not quite as dark as I am with nothing, but I'm much closer. However, water base and what I'm trying to direct you to is start thinking about using dyes, in particular water-based dyes. Now the reason I say that is that if you use an alcohol base, which they're great, but if you're using a pre-stain, the alcohol in it can be strong enough to kind of try to redissolve your blotch control and kind of soften it up too much. The other thing with a dye, unlike a stain, an oil-based stain, it doesn't have to have what's called a binder. That's the oil that's in the stain. That's what adheres the colorant to the wood. It's just pure pigment, or pure color rather. The thing with the oil, with a dye, any dye, alcohol or water, but the water, what happens is the dye is much stronger. And if you're mixing your own, you can mix it to any degree of darkness that you want. The other thing is, unlike an oil-based stain where the second coat does not a lot, a second coat of dye will definitely give you a darker color. Now, we'll do another video at some point about the techniques and whatever working with dyes, because they are a little different than a stain, in that they dry very fast, and so you've got to work rapidly with them. But again, I'm going to emphasize, anytime you're doing anything, and particularly when you're using pre-stains or blotch control, whatever you want to call it, you want to experiment. Make sure you test on scrap wood. And again, if you're using a water-based or alcohol-based dye, remember something, the alcohol is going to dry faster than the water. If you get on there with a little foam brush and you start just brushing a little bit here and there, you know, and then want to wipe it off and hang around and wait on it and wipe it off like you would an oil base, don't. That thing's going to look like a patchwork quilt. The secret to getting a dye on is saturation. Get it on, get it off. Do as smaller areas as you can comfortably do and move. It's not uncommon for me to grab some help and I'm wiping on, and we like to use stain pads or something that holds a lot of fluid, and predominantly we've got a video on doing a large surface where we spray it on good and wet, then we take a handful of paper towels and get it wiped off. This is going to allow you to get it even and not get zebra stripes and not get that patchwork look. The other thing with a dye is you can put as many coats on as you want until you get the color you want. That's a quick synopsis of dealing with pre-stains and understanding what's happening. Okay? I'm Charles Neal. We'll catch you later.